Right. Well, I certainly don't consider myself to be an expert on handwriting, partly because my family either complain or tease me if they try to read my shopping lists. And I think, I mean, I write loads and loads of notes for myself, and sometimes it's quite convenient if only I'm the person who can read them. But I have quite strong memories of some writing classes that we did when I was training at ATA in the 80s. I found the classes great fun. What we did, we sat, there was a group of us. I think I was probably just in my first year or possibly early second year. I don't think I was very experienced then. And we put some tables together, just flat tables, and a group of us sat around these tables. And then we had about maybe 3 teachers who came around behind us. We had big pieces of paper. I'm not sure what we wrote with, but it might have been crayons or chalk and perhaps pencils, but things that it was easy to write with, using quite big movements, as infant school children would really. And as the teachers would make suggestions what we did, or we could experiment. And as we were doing this, teachers would come around and put hands on our neck or shoulders or wherever. And that to me was very revealing, because of course I could feel what was happening. Well, I wasn't particularly aware of my body then, but I began to feel where I was tightening my neck or my shoulders. I'd give attention to my hand and so on. So that was a really interesting introduction to writing. And one of the things I remember doing, we started off with very simple movements and patterns and shapes, and then simple big movements, big letters, again, just as infant school children would learn to make letters. And part of the experience that I had was that I kind of regressed. So as I began to release my tensions in my neck and a hand and arm and wherever they were releasing, my writing, when I started to write, went out of control. So rather than having an adult style of handwriting, which obviously I must have learnt to do through endgaining at some point, I was basically, I think I went back to the age of 5 or 7, various stages when I must have probably tensed up, as obviously, think of the situation of a teacher teaching a whole class of children to write. There must be a lot of endgaining there, and probably not very much consideration given to the child's posture and so on. So to me, that it was a very liberating experience to have fun doing these shapes and things, but also quite revealing. And I also realized that quite a lot of the tensions that I had in connection to my adult handwriting must have arisen in particular at the age of about 8, when we were being taught to do drawing-up writing, and then we were supposed to make it smaller. So again, it's an interesting process. So what I'm going to do today is to make a few suggestions of, if any of you want to dabble in writing and applying the technique to writing, or if any of you are particularly interested in writing or drawing, of course, you might want to give attention in a bit more depth. Obviously, that's your choice. But I'm going to make a few suggestions for experimenting. And what I suggest we do first of all is give a bit of consideration to the setup. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of options. You will probably think of more options. It's something just to play with. We have a number of choices. One of the choices, before I forget, is what we write with. And a lot of modern writing, well, pens and things, need a certain amount of pressure. So it's always a good idea, if you want to avoid a lot of the tension that you may have with writing, to use, when you can, to use something that writes easily. So a pencil, especially a softish pencil or maybe an HB, is good. Good quality roller tips or ballpoints or whatever perhaps will be okay, whereas others, the cheaper ones, often do need quite a bit of tension, pressure rather, and possibly grip. But there are all sorts of different things that you could choose to write with, but it's worth giving consideration to that. Another thing I'd like to point out, now I'm going to try to demonstrate, I'm going to use a stool and my little kneeling stool, because this is one way that I sometimes like to write. If I'm doing, if I am writing, as in sort of writing down some ideas, working out some ideas, I often like to move around, and sometimes I'll use a desk and a chair, but sometimes I like a change and put things on the floor. But another change is to sit like this with a stool. But I'm doing this now for practical reasons, because my computer with the camera is on the desk. I don't know if any of you have a writing slope, but I would recommend that you explore having a slope to write on. I find it makes a big difference, because if you've got your paper flat on the table, it's a big incentive to put your head over it. And if you've seen children, particularly teenagers, writing, doing their homework, there's a big tendency to really hunch over, as well as often to twist and things. But if you think about it, if you have something flat on a table, you're going to be looking at it from an angle. I'll remind you here about the atlanto-occipital joint. If I get a bit lower, if you remember, that's just under the ear, and that's where I will point out to pupils that to look down, whether it's for reading or writing or any other purpose, rather than hunching at the shoulders. This is going to be a more efficient place initially to bend from, and then of course you've got the movement of the eyes. So as well as freeing up the neck, we look at all that. But basically, even wherever your head is, you're going to be looking at an angle at the letters, and that again, whether you're reading or writing, is a stimulus to put your head over the top. So having your writing on a slope, and I've got a little portable one, which I do actually use. Because it's portable, I can put it away and just get it out for any time I want to write for maybe 15 minutes or more. For me, I always find it's worth it. But another thing I'd like to show you is that writing can't be a symmetrical activity. So I've placed my writing paper in the center of my body, but it means that I've got to, in order to write, I have to bring my hand across my body. Now, there's no problem with that, except that for some people it will tend to cause either tightness here or to sort of lean the body over. But it's perfectly possible to write like this without. So, you can give directions to widen and awareness of how you're balancing your body, and, looking at freedom of movement of the arm. There should be no problem with that. However, another option is to have your writing surface to the side. So now it's in line with my arm, my writing arm, and it's easier to keep the width here. The only drawback, I think now, the obvious drawback, is that I've got to sort of look at an angle and probably just turn my head, which again isn't a problem, but for some people it could be, especially for pupils who are, haven't really thought about these issues before, or if they're not very well aware of their use. Again, some people, particularly left-handers, but even right-handers, like to write at an angle, with the paper at an angle, and again, that's not a problem. But all of these things are choices, and I think it's worth just giving a little bit of thought to it, both for yourself and for pupils, because just being aware of what the choices are, I think in itself is very helpful. Okay, so I hope you've chosen somewhere for you to write. Again, you know, if you're writing on your knee, oh, that's another thing. If I ever am writing on my knee, what I would do is use a cushion. So I put a cushion on my knee and I put my writing surface, whatever that is, on the cushion, so that, again, I'm not having to write sort of down here and hunch my head over it, but I can stay fairly upright without too much effort. So we're going to come back to that in a minute or two, but what I'd like you to do is ideally stand up and let's look at some very basic movement of the upper limb. Now, I'm not going to go into this in tremendous detail or anatomical correctness, because that's something that you know, you can all be looking into another time, and I may have forgotten something, which is fine, because again, this is something that we can explore together, or you can explore. But let's look at the actual, how the arm actually moves. So you've got some, well, a lot of movement available at the shoulder. We're probably not going to use that very much in writing, unless, of course, you're writing on a board. So if you take a class and you're writing on a whiteboard or blackboard, well, then you will be writing somewhere up here. So you would need to consider, or you might want to consider, how you're using the shoulder joint, or how you're moving from the shoulder joint, or from here you've got I mean, some people consider that the upper limb actually starts at the sternoclavicular joint here, because the collarbone actually moves around following the arm. And then you've got the muscular connections at the back. So, of course, Alexander-wise, we want to direct width across here, and be aware of the connections, the muscular connections between the arm and the shoulder blade, and virtually the whole length of the spine. So hopefully you've got your back supporting your arm. However, for most writing purposes, we're sort of doing things at a lower level. So I think the other joints are more relevant. So we've got the elbow joint. Now, basically, we've got the hinge movement from there. So you might like to explore that. If you might want to stabilize your upper arm with your other hand, and then just notice how, as you bend the arm, that hinges, and the angle at which you have your upper arm, rotation-wise, will affect the angle of your hinge. So if you rotate, because the upper arm will rotate at the shoulder joint. So, you know, if I rotate my shoulder joint out, or my arm out at the shoulders, my arm would hinge out to the side, which I definitely wouldn't use for writing. You know, I might have it in, but without narrowing. I might have it this way, just sort of, so now my upper arm, I think, is rotated forwards, but I've still got the width, hopefully. And this is the kind of angle I would use for writing. We've also got rotation. So again, if you stabilize your upper arm with your other hand and rotate the forearm, so the tibia and fibula are rotating. Sorry, I got it wrong, haven't I? That's the leg. No, I can't remember what it is. Sorry.
Radius, Janet.
Radius, thank you. Radius.
Ulna and radius.
Yeah. Okay, so the radius and ulna are rotating around each other. And we might use this a little bit in writing. We use it in lots of other activities. Then you've got the wrist. Well, the wrist is a hinge, partly. So this is what we use a lot. And again, it will depend on the angle of the forearm, at which angle your wrist is going to hinge. And then you've got the knuckles here. So you've got the fingers can move as a whole from the wrist, sorry, from this joint here. Or of course, you've also got the articulation of the other joints in the fingers. So you've got an awful lot of articulation there that's available. And as far as the thumb goes, you've got the saddle joint. So you've got the rotation there, as well as the flexion. And of course, one of the things to ideally avoid in writing is to avoid gripping the pen too hard. And I mean, I don't know how many of you have memories of writing exam papers and coming out with achy hands, because that is the tendency that we want to grip. And it's also worth bearing in mind that the muscles, most of the muscles, well, obviously there are muscles inside the hand, but there are also the muscles coming from the elbow that become tendons going into the hand as extensors and flexors. And again, it's often the flexors that dominate because those are the gripping ones. So a general direction that's useful for the use of the hand, including writing, is to lengthen and also to soften. So the lengthening and the softening are things that you can bear in mind, and space here and so on. So I think it's you know, quite useful sometimes to just be a little bit analytical and think, well, what's actually involved in writing? And so what I'm going to suggest, could you now go to wherever you're going to write, and then we can explore some of those movements actually in writing. An alternative, if you don't have a big enough piece of paper, you could just sort of use a flat surface, and pretend. I mean, you could have turn your writing implement upside down and just pretend to write. Otherwise, you know, if you've got something to play around with and some paper, then that's what I'd like you to do. So what I'd like you to do first of all is, once you've arranged yourself, just start with a fairly big movement, so that if you do use the hinge joint from the elbow. So if you put your pencil or whatever it is on the paper and just basically hinge, so what would happen is you're drawing arcs. Sorry, I'm not actually drawing, but that this is a movement obviously that is used in drawing and writing, and that's coming right from the elbow, which we probably wouldn't normally do, but it is an option. Especially, I mean, if you were ever, I don't know, drawing graffiti or something, you would use these big arm movements, whereas in normal writing we'd be using smaller movements. So then from the wrist you could also do an arch by just using the hinge joint from the wrist. If anybody, I'm not sure, I mean, I hope my directions or suggestions are clear. If anybody's not sure what I'd like them to do, please tell me. Obviously it's also, I mean, you can do what you like, but these are some suggestions. And then try using the small movements of the fingers, and see what happens. And every now and again, just pause. So pause now wherever you are, and just give yourself some directions. In fact, I should have taught you through this in the beginning, but however you're sitting, just be aware of your body as a whole being supported, with your head balanced at the top of your spine. And if you are hunched over, of course, see if it's possible to open out. And does that opening out require that you adjust your writing position of your paper or pen? And notice your breathing. Breathing is something that often gets interfered with when we're writing. And of course, what I'm talking about is just the mechanics of writing, but there is the whole realm of thoughts and concentration and what you're writing about, which in itself, that area has plenty of stimuli for our habits. And the lengthening of the widening of the space in the body, check you're not holding the pen tightly. You can always experiment with different pen holes, you know, try holding it in a different way. And feel free, because this is just a sort of playful approach, you know, we're not actually writing anything important. or legible, feel free to sort of get going again and then stop. You could also check what you're doing with your mouth, your tongue, your jaw, or any of those tightening up in some way. How are the muscles in your arm? Are you remembering to keep them lengthened as far as possible? Notice whether when you give a direction, does that affect your breathing? Do you hold your breath for a moment? Because writing is really quite a complex activity and strong stimulus for these habits. Here are some suggestions, the sort of thing you could do. So the up and down movements would be done with the fingers and thumb. It's interesting, I think also different people's styles of handwriting must be in some way, or to a great degree, affected by how we individually use all these joints. And with the thumb, for example, do you move your thumb? Do you sort of bend your thumb as you write, or do you keep your thumb fairly still and use more of the finger movements, or somewhere in between? So, as I say, you can do sort of up and down movements with the fingers. Try drawing circles as well. See what happens then. And you can experiment with having or noticing whether you have your forearm or wrist resting on the surface. And if it's resting on the surface, is it resting heavily or lightly? Or is your arm actually suspended? Now, I'm not sure if my camera's frozen again. No, I think everybody's just been very still. Okay. You could also try sort of actual movements horizontally with sort of zigzaggy things, and then with little circles, loops and things, as in pre-writing, if you remember what you might have done as a child for joined up writing. And as you write, do a line of writing or squiggles, that's when your forearm hinge would be active. You'd be sort of sliding or gliding your forearm to the right and then back again to the beginning of the line. Again, notice whether your preference is to keep the forearm or the wrist or the outside of the hand on the page, just sort of sliding lightly, or is it getting stuck? Are you sort of leaning heavily into it and then you have to move it? Or do you actually, I mean, what happens if you actually take your forearm slightly off the paper again, so that you're writing a bit more almost in the air, but with the pen in contact? If you were painting with a brush, you would have to do this. So there are lots of permutations, things that you could do. And if any of you are artists, well then, I think you'd be using lots of these movements combined, perhaps with body movements. You might need to sort of get up off your chair into a monkey or a lunge and move around, so that it's easy to get access to the different shapes you want to make. And again, remember to give yourself some directions. Check what's happening. Is your neck free? Is your breathing flowing? Of course, if you find you hold your breath, well, again, just treat it as a game. Most of us have a tendency to hold the breath in various activities sometimes. So just think, oh, there I go again, let go of the breathing. Can I actually do that shape or those letters without holding my breath? Just explore. And it's something you could sort of do every now and again. If you don't want to work at it very seriously, you could periodically have a little play with these things. And it would eventually shed a lot of light onto what you're actually doing. Okay, so I would now like to do something different. I would like Peter to show us some videos that I've sent him. as an introduction to something called lazy eights, which we will have a go at. Hopefully there's a little bit of time. Lazy eights are something, I think, from Brain Gym, and they are used or were used at the Educare Primary School in Kingston upon Thames. They sort of borrowed them, and there are different ways you can do them. So I sent Peter links to about 4 videos. So if we could maybe start with those, Peter, and you could have a go as you see them. You know, you could. We will actually start off with miming in the air, but you can also do it on a surface without necessarily writing initially.
The lazy 8. Find the hand you write with.
Sorry, is that showing clearly for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
And point to the sky. Now take your other hand and place it on the star. Place your pointer finger on your writing hand on the red dot and follow me.
I'm sorry about
Over,
that.
around, cross, over, around. Let's do that again. Over, around, cross over, around, again, over, around, cross over, around, over, around, cross over, around, over.
Just you give attention to your breathing while you're watching this.
Over, around, over, around, cross over, around. Very good.
Okay, we could go on to the next one, but I found listening to that, because this lady probably, I should imagine, is putting quite a bit of effort in. I found it, I don't know, for me it was a stimulus to tighten up.
Sorry.
So did you not hear me?
I'm sorry. I'm fiddling with the things in the background to prepare the next one.
Okay, okay. Well, I'll just whenever you're ready, Peter.
Okay, sorry. Right. I'm struggling with the technology.
If it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter too much.
Oh no, it'll be all right. Here we go.
Need help with their lowercase or letters and remembering how to do them. First thing you do is have the kids do the lazy 8. They start in the center. Their left hand or their non-dominant hand is in the center. They should be, basically their body should be centered with that. And they start in the center and just come around, making a lazy 8, the same motion over and over again. This is for motor memory for the kids. So now we're actually going to show how the letters fit onto that line. Here's A. Here's B. Here's C. D. E. F. G. H. I. J. K. L. M. N. O. P. Q. R.
I think you just wanted a minute of that, didn't you, Jen?
Yes, yes, that's fine.
Oh, damn it. Would you like me to go on to the third one?
Yes, please. This is quite a nice one because it's much more flowing. So I think there are various theories of the brain gym people that it affects the brain and helps coordination, which I'm sure there's a lot in that. And she was obviously doing it in different ways. So I don't know, we could look at the last one or not. Maybe if we have a go ourselves, as was initially just in the air, because I think I couldn't find the perfect videos. That one and perhaps the next one that we might show were better ones. But I think I felt with a lot of them they clearly weren't giving direction. Obviously, they're not Alexander's videos. But the idea is you start in the center, and I'm doing a mirror image, I think. So you sort of go up to the left, and then down, and round to the center, and then up the other side. So you're basically tracing a letter 8, number 8 on its side. And of course, we can do it with direction. So keeping supported by your body, releasing your neck, releasing your spine, without holding your breath. Feel free to swap hands if you want to. And the idea is that as with the writing, the brain gym thing, or the teachers thing for children, they fit the letters into these. Then you know, the next stage is to do it actually on a page. So you do it on a surface. Whether one lady, I think in the next one, is showing it on a whiteboard. The children there, Australian or American, there was doing it on a table. But I think there seem to be 2 ways to fit the writing in. One is to do big letters that fit around the actual contour of the 8, and the last video, which we may or may not watch, she does it in a different way. She puts the letters separately, but the idea is to keep the flow going. So I think they do about 3 contours, and then they write the letter, and then they do another 3 or 4 contours, and then they write the letter. So they're aiming to get the flow going. But of course, we could do that a lot more with our directions. There are plenty of videos online of these, and a lot of the people I felt had very bad use actually, so they're not particularly inspiring. And the ones here I picked out weren't too bad. So I don't know, I mean, we could show the last one, or would people prefer to have a discussion about it? And
something I want to say, Janet, is that when you sent me those videos last night, I looked up the whole sort of concept of the lazy 8 and read more about it. And it revealed something to me that I'd not noticed before. And I don't know if other people in the class right now have noticed this. It's particularly striking for me, not when I'm writing, but when I do what you suggested a moment ago of drawing the lazy 8 in the air like this in front of me. And what I realize is that being right-handed, the right side of it is really clear in my mind. That's easy for me to conceive of, whereas the left side feels almost like it's taking place, you know, if it were in a theater off stage. It's
wow.
like I can't conceive of it as clearly. And this is partly the underlying purpose of this procedure, which is to get both sides of the brain working together on writing. And this has been shown to help children a lot, for example, who reverse letters, you know, the B the wrong way around with the loop on the left and that sort of thing. And this is all about balancing the sides of the brain. So did anybody else have this experience that if you're right-handed, that the left side is less kind of real somehow? Do you get that? No, I'm on my own with that.
No, I do, Peter.
Oh, do you? That's a relief.
I relate that. If you've got a circle of people and you're passing a ball round the circle, if the ball is coming towards me from the left, I find it really difficult to know that it's there.
Yeah, because our whole brain's going that way if we're right-handed. Our whole focus really, and so the other side is relatively neglected.
I thought the video with putting the hand in the center, the non-dominant hand in the center, was interesting.
Yeah.
As a left-hander, Peter, it was less of an issue for me because, as Robin rightly said, left-handers spend a lot of time having to deal with the right-handed world, and it is much less of a problem. And in fact, I've been using my right hand doing this exercise all morning, so I've just put my left hand out of the way, and it's really great. Actually, it's much lighter with the right hand than it is with the left. So it's interesting, really interesting. Thank you, Janet.
Yes.
I'd also like to mention that one video I found, a man was using it for his eyes. So he was tracing the 8 in the air, and he kept his head still and was following it with his eyes. He did it with each hand in turn, or possibly reversing the direction. And then he did it with both hands together. So that's, again, hand-eye coordination, I think.
Yeah.
But we could add plenty in terms of inhibition and direction.
Oh, yes, yes. Our use of ourselves could be much better. But the thing itself is about conception on both sides. And it's, as well as, of course, we make use of the flow, which, as you say, you could see so much better with the last person, couldn't you? It was just much more beautiful.
Yes.
Person with the white coat on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the problem. I was going to say that's the last problem with the last. That's the problem with the last video. In a way, it's a reason not to show it. Is that the person after that is that the person who's doing the last one has very poor use.
Which the one that we didn't show?
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
There might be a reason not to show it.
I've got a question about the earlier bits of what you said, Janet, when you were actually suggesting ways of actually writing. Most children now, after they've learnt to write on paper, do all their work on a computer.
True. Yes.
So, and nobody teaches any children to type any longer.
No.
Some years ago, my eldest grandson was actually taught to type at the beginning of his secondary school education, but they don't do it now, and primary school children have to do work on computers, and nobody teaches them to type, which is dreadful, really.
Yes, they really should, shouldn't they?
Although the moment may be gone because it's all going to be voice activated soon, of course, for text. I've been incredibly fortunate. I learned to touch type fluently in my late teens, like, you know, an old-fashioned secretary. And gosh, I've had my money's worth out of that over the last 20 years.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, everyone should be taught to touch type, shouldn't they?
The moment may be passing now where that will be so useful, but it really has been.
I think that it would be really useful to do that in terms of coordination anyway, if you're not a pianist, so that you have that. I found that really, really helpful, Janet, all of it, all the way through. When I was doing my training, what I discovered early on was that when I was writing, because I was writing notes, I was writing my shoulder and I'd get to the end of a line. I'd think, how did my shoulder get up there? And drop it. And then I'm not going to do that this time. And up it would go again. So I thought, I'm going to try an experiment. So I actually started writing with my left hand in my spare time and taught myself to write left-handedly. And I'm sure that that had a huge impact then on my right-handed writing, because I'd given it a bit more of a rest and a bit more awareness, without getting in a place of, oh, you stupid woman, you've done the same thing again. It became a, oh, that's interesting, which is always a much better approach to oneself when one is not wanting to tighten up. But yeah, so thanks ever so much for that. I have the objection to the lazy 8 because obviously it's not an 8, it's an infinity sign, but that's me being picky. But you can also do that standing up and moving around your table in that sort of total spiralic horizontal connection, and there's something really special about that movement. But I rather like that better as an infinity, because it becomes much more holistic, for want of a better word, than talking about it as an 8. If you're going to talk about it as an 8, anybody, I think they ought to say it's an 8 lying down on its side.
Yes, thank you for the tip, Jane. That's a good one.
That's me being picky and
it has a point, it does.
Yeah.
I think they've done it for teaching children, which is why they don't use words like infinity, perhaps. Yeah.
Well, they teach them all sorts of grammatical terms that I never learned when I was in school.
Well, it's the kindergarten, actually, is what it tends to say on the American videos. So I think it's very young children. Is that a good place to stop? I know there's so much more, of course. But maybe next time, Janet, in person. That would be nice.
Yes, maybe.
So thank you all for sticking through all these classes. I'm amazed. I went through a dip in the middle where I really had enough of them, but I've started to enjoy them again the last couple of months. I think it is time to stop unless we really have a very nasty variant in the future. Let's hope not. It's been